because that's what we're looking for, interesting, meaningful lives. It's just interesting for us to look and examine where it is that we find interest and meaning. Do we find that interest and that meaning in these extremes? And that means that we have to live at extremes. What makes us any different from a cocaine addict then? Our hit is just something different. It's just other people's suffering, other people's misery, other people's drama. If you can find excitement and energy and love, all the best parts of life and the mundane parts of life, you don't have to take hits off of other people's suffering. You can find that joy and everything in your own life, and that becomes contagious, because then people can kind of wonder where it is that you get it from, and to live in those moderate periods and find the absolute joys and excitements in the small things of life, because they're there. I promise you that they're there. You just have to look for them. It takes work. That's part of the hard thing. It takes a little bit of work. But I don't know, what are you doing otherwise? And I really mean that. Like, what are we doing otherwise? If we want to have an exciting, meaningful life, what are we doing that's more important than that? And I mean that, by the way. I'll say it with a smile now. What are you doing otherwise? What is more important than living a meaningful, exciting life? Because whatever you're doing right now, you're deciding that that's the most important thing. I'll say that again, because whatever you're doing right now, at this very moment, you're deciding is more important than that. If what you're doing right now is not contributing to an exciting, meaningful life in some way, you can't see how it's going to do that. You're deciding that whatever you're doing right now is more important than that. You hit on something important there. It's like I've talked in the past about how, like, for example, in English, we have a poverty of language with regards to referring to love. And we just use that one word. You know, I love my mom, I love buffalo wings, I love my siblings, I love my friends, but we love all of these things differently. But we only have that one word, and we're kind of expected to understand what people mean when we say that word. But there's no good reason for us to believe that people understand what we mean when we say that word. So, for example, what Amanda's getting at, like, I don't care, just with a period. I don't care one way or the other, versus I don't care with an exclamation mark. And this kind of suggests, of course, that there is some level of caring. It's that punctuation at the end that tells us. It's one of the reasons that punctuation matters so much, because it gives us a sense of tone. And by this verse, what we might mean is that I'm indifferent, one way or the other. If you know, should we go left or right? Well, I'm indifferent, one way or the other. Versus, in which way do we go? I don't care. There's a passion there. There's an anger there. There's an energy that's there. When love is itself a passionate thing. That's almost how we define it. And when we exclude the emotion from it, it kind of takes away the heart of what that thing is. You know, too often we confuse these two things, or we superimpose it, that when someone cares, well, you know, they might be saying I'm indifferent, versus like I don't care, like I don't one way or the other. Like someone died, I don't know, 100 years ago, or 200 years ago, or 500 years ago, and you say I don't care. So you just don't care. Yeah, I don't care. Oh, so you don't care? I just said it. I don't care. What I'm saying is, what I intend to say is, I'm indifferent. But if we don't use this word, I'm indifferent, then that person, because we're not being as clear as we could be, that person is going to interpret us in the worst possible way. If that makes sense. It's one of the reasons that we practice explaining ourselves so much, because if you're arguing with somebody, they're already kind of almost inherently going to interpret you in the worst possible way. Like, for example, for those of you who follow anything at all, like I've come up a couple times about what's happening over in Israel, you'll notice that you can't say one thing without the other side jumping all over you, saying that you don't care about their side. So, for example, is it bad that children and civilians die in Gaza? Yes. Oh, so what you're saying is you don't care about the dead Israelis then from October 7th. I didn't say that. I didn't say that at all. So you think that it's okay for them to have been raped and murdered. I never said that. Okay, so then you're okay with what's going on with the... Well, I didn't say that either. You know? In other words, if you just don't 100%, and this is something that we have found more and more and more, and I mean, it relates specifically to what we just read about the dark psychology of social media, that opinions keep getting pushed further and further and further and further to the extremes, such that opinions used to look like this, and you'd have radicals on either side. Social media restructures it to get opinions to look more like this. And what's worse is that this isn't necessarily how the real world looks. This is how Twitter looks, and this is how Instagram looks, and this is how social media looks. That's not how the real world looks. The real world looks like this. But the danger of it is that if you can convince people, or if you simply create like a type of I guess, life experience such that this is what people see in their daily lives because they live on social media, then you can convince them that this is what the real world looks like. And it doesn't even have to be intentional. I don't know that it's necessarily people sitting around saying, let's polarize the world, let's make it look terrible and evil and scary. No, it's just, this doesn't get people to click on things. And if what we're worshiping is the dollar, and this doesn't, the blue line here doesn't create dollars. The pink line is the thing that creates dollars. And so we push our content more and more and more towards the pink, because we're not worshiping truth. We're not looking for objective reality. I mean, a lot of our language today betrays the fact that we're trying to escape objective reality. Instead, what we're doing is we're pushing the world more and more towards these extremes because, who cares? Nothing matters anyway. There's no truth. There's no reality. I was talking to during summer school. I had my first principal meeting only 2 days into summer school this past summer. And I remember talking with the principal. I was just telling the story to someone a couple of days ago. And the principal said something to me in the meeting. She said, well, perception is reality. And so I stopped her and I said, no. And she says, well, but for our students, perception is reality. In other words, how we perceive things is reality. And I said, no, that's not true. And I told her, that's stupid. I said, my God, you're an administrator and you believe that? I have a recording of it, by the way, because I tend to record those things. And she's just like beside herself that someone actually pushed back on that and said, no, that's completely stupid. Just because you perceive things just because you perceive something a certain way doesn't mean it actually happened. I could perceive right now that there's a meteor falling and it lands right outside this window. Did it actually happen? And people will say, but for you it did. No. For your misperception it did, and you might live your life under a misperception or a misconception, but that doesn't mean it actually happened. I could walk around all day today saying that the British won the American Revolutionary War. That doesn't make you all British. It means that I have a separation from reality. We used to have a word for that. It's called psychosis. When you believe something that doesn't correspond with reality. And there's this odd thing. I mean, I don't know if you tell me if you've ever read anything like this at all, but there are people who've written these books about how you can induce a mass psychosis to get people to believe ridiculous things. I don't know, maybe a teacher should give you something like that to read someday. But if you can get people to believe absurdities, then you can get them to, again, commit atrocities. If you can get people to believe that psychosis, like there's your reality and then there's my reality, and therefore there's no real reality, and therefore there's no real psychosis, which means that you can create the world to look any way that you want it to look. Like I always say, man, examine the motives of people. Why do people want you to think the world looks like this? Why does the world want you to live in extremes? And by the way, there are some things that we should probably be extremists about. I'll let you figure out what those things are. One place I'd maybe want you to start is to believe that murder and racism are extreme. Maybe we can work our way back from there once we acknowledge those things. But there are some things that we should probably be extremists about, but there are also things that we probably shouldn't be extremists about until we completely understand them. Because you can only be 100% certain about things that you don't completely understand. And I'll say that again, you can only be 100% certain about things that you don't completely understand. It's that, complete certainty that, oh, I know everything there is to know about this subject, that causes us to not realize what we don't know. Tell me if you've heard this before. You don't know what you don't know. And there's a lot that you don't know. I remember one time a friend of mine, I said something to a friend of mine about how I didn't know something. He said, well, I don't know about that. He said, well, what you don't know could fill a library. And I thought, you're damn right about that. What I don't know could fill a library. It's true. You go down to the library right now and you think about that, as small as our library is, what percentage of all the information in that library do I know? And I couldn't even begin to guess. 1/10 of 1%? 1/4%? And I'm someone who's spent most of my life trying to learn as much as I possibly can. Most of my waking hours are spent trying to learn as much as I possibly can. I like playing video games from time to time. I never just sit and play a video game. I sit and I watch something while I'm doing that. Or I listen to a podcast, or I'm watching a lecture on something. I'm constantly learning as much as I can. And yet, what percentage of the information do I have it's in that library just down the... Making sure I'm pointing in the right direction. Down the hallway that way. There, I wasn't even sure about which way the hallway was that led to the library. And yet, you have to constantly be aware that what you don't know could fill a library, and you don't know what you don't know. And that's the only way that you can ever continue to learn, because you have to be open to the idea that you don't know everything. If you think you know everything, you can't possibly learn everything. And if you think that you know everything that you need to know, it's the same thing. I mean, this is kind of when old people should probably just get in the box, right? When a person sits there and says, I've seen it all. And as soon as you believe that, what are you waiting around for? You know, there's so much of the world that we haven't seen. There's so many conversations we haven't had. There's so many perspectives we don't know. There's so much information that could make us better people. And I mean that better in whatever sense you think a person can be made better. Stronger, empathetic, selfish, whatever you think better is. You can never be made worse by more information. You can be made more uncomfortable, sure. Of course, because as we know, the truth can hurt if you fight against it. But if you instead make the truth your ally, then of course you won't be put off by the truth. You'll seek it. You'll see it for what it is. It's a shield against a lot of the tragedies of life. The truth is. And so we should seek those things that make us better and make us stronger. And one of the things that makes us better and stronger is to see the world outside of just our very limited scope. You know, and again, we make this mistake when we think the world looks like this pink line. And by the way, people who live in this blue line make a huge mistake when we look at the people who live in the pink line and go, they don't know anything. They're just this. They're just that. Nothing is just anything, man. Because the people who live in this pink line right now, when they say that, you know, the young people are the future, well, dude, this is what the future looks like right now. This pink line. What do you think's over here? If we live in these pink lines, what do you think's over here? What do you think the world's gonna be made better or worse by us inhabiting the extremes and the margins? Do you think that the world will be made better or worse by us looking at our opponents rather than just our people with different opinions, but we think of them as our opponents? What do you think is going to be on the other end of us looking at them and saying, you know what, they're just evil and stupid? You know, not that they have different opinions, not that they think differently, not that they have different ideas, but that they're just evil. Now, why? Because it gives us something to do, largely. That's a big part of it. Because this is kind of boring. Most of us agree about most things. And I think that most of us do probably agree on both things. I think if you got, I don't know why I said that. I happen to know, because I spend a lot of time over there. You get an Israeli and a Palestinian together, and you ask them, so, you both love your children? Yes. And just try to barrel it down to just yes, no questions. Do you love your children? Yes, but these guys keep killing them. Stop. Do you love your children? Yes. Do you want better for your families in the future? Yes. Do you both love your gods? Yes. Do you both love your communities? Yes. Are you both tired of all the suffering and the war and the fighting and the death and the blood? Are you guys all tired of that? Yes. Well, what do you see on television? What do you see on TikTok? What do you see on Instagram? These extremes. And it's tempting, man. It can pull us into these extremes. But like I said, one thing you can be absolutely certain about, that the people who are on these ends, who are absolutely certain about their views, they don't know much about them. Because again, you can only be absolutely certain about things you don't understand. The more you know, the less definite some things become. Not everything. Not everything. There are some things that you can become very, very informed about, and they can become very, very clear. This is true. But having said that, I guess I would ask that question: how much time have we spent becoming certain and clear about things? If something is worth getting fired up about, then maybe we should become absolutely certain and clear about it. If we're not willing to do that, we're apathetic. We're indifferent. We're indifferent to it. We care a little bit, not enough to become really informed about it. Not to let it guide a lot of our lives, but enough that we can use that thing to excite us. Why do I care so much about this, about an issue? Because it's exciting. It's interesting. Do any of us really give half of a crap about George Floyd as a human being? If we did, we'd know a lot about him. And the more we knew about him, the less sympathetic we might be. Do any of us really give a crap about... Remember back in March, there was someone who shut up a school? No. We cared about it at the time. The manifesto was just released yesterday. It was leaked because nobody wanted to release it. I wonder how many of us even know what I'm talking about right now. Well, we sure gave a lot of crap about it. And I'm not saying you specifically, I'm saying us as a culture, as a society. Because the truth is that most of the time we only care about things as far as it interests, so far as it adds salt and pepper to our lives. So long as it makes our lives interesting. Because that's what we're looking for, interesting, meaningful lives. It's just interesting for us to look and examine where it is that we find interest in meaning. Do we find that interest in that meaning in these extremes? And that means that we have to live at extremes. What makes us any different from a cocaine addict then? Our hit is just something different. It's just other people's suffering, other people's misery, other people's drama. If you can find excitement and energy and love in all the best parts of life, in the mundane parts of life, you don't have to take hits off of other people's suffering. You can find that joy and everything in your own life, and that becomes contagious because then people can kind of wonder where it is that you get it from. You know, it's kind of like a first date. Where should your first date be? Imagine if your first date is skydiving off of the Eiffel Tower after eating at a 5-star restaurant. My God, what's your second date going to be like? And your third? In other words, if you could only find excitement at those extremes, you take away the ability to appreciate the in-betweens. And so maybe learn how to live in those moderate periods and find the absolute joys and excitements in the small things of life, because they're there. I promise you that they're there. You just have to look for them. It takes work. That's part of the hard thing. It takes a little bit of work. But I don't know, what are you doing otherwise? And I really mean that. Like, what are we doing otherwise? If we want to have an exciting, meaningful life, what are we doing that's more important than that? And I mean that, by the way. I'll say it with a smile now. What are you doing otherwise? What is more important than living a meaningful, exciting life? Because whatever you're doing right now, you're deciding that that's the most important thing. I'll say that again, because whatever you're doing right now, at this very moment, you're deciding is more important than that. If what you're doing right now is not contributing to an exciting, meaningful life in some way, you can't see how it's going to do that. You're deciding that whatever you're doing right now is more important than that. It's that indifference, man. Hate's not the opposite of love. If you have hate, you have passion, you have excitement. It's that indifference, dude. It's that indifference to fill in the blank. It's the indifference to suffering. It's the indifference to other people, what they go through. And I mean on both sides, man. That's one of the hard things about apathy, man. Can you be empathetic towards the Palestinians while also being empathetic towards the Israelis? Yeah. Can you be empathetic towards towards the suffering of transgender people and also be empathetic towards religious people who find it an abomination? Yeah. Can you be empathetic towards the rich and also be empathetic towards the poor? Yeah. Life doesn't have to be these extremes. It's only these extremes if we don't think about it. The more we study it, the more we see we have a lot in common then. And I'm always head on a swivel for the people who don't want us to know that. And why? I gave you one heads up earlier. Clicks, money. Are any of us getting rich off of the suffering of others? Somebody is. I bet it's not us though. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms?